Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. Today I have created a video annotation for one of Iago's soliloquies, so let's jump right into it. Act 1, Scene 2, lines 337 to 98 read, "Thus do I ever make my fool my purse, for I mine own gained knowledge should profane, if I would time expend with such a snipe, but for my own sport and profit. I hate the more, and it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets he's done my office. I know not if to be true, but I, for mere suspicion in that kind, will do as if for surety. He holds me well, the better shall my purpose work on him. Cassio's a proper man. Let me see now. To get his place to plume up my will in double knavery, how, let's see. After some time to abuse Othello's ear, he is too familiar with his wife. He hath a person and a smooth disposed to be suspected, framed to make a woman false. The more is of a free and open nature, that thinks men honest, but seem to be so, and will as tenderly be led by the nose as asses are. I have it. It is engendered. In the first lines of Act 1, Scene 2, Iago states, "Thus do I ever make my fool my purse." Iago introduces us to what basically follows up to be his devious plan. He begins to speak in transactions. He seems to explain one thing, then quickly switches to another. Here, he is using a metaphor. Iago tells us about the fact that he sells his ideas for money by making a fool out of his client. In this case, he is talking about Rodrigo, by using his stupidity against him. Iago then begins to explain how he would be wasting his skills, time, and resources if he didn't get some sort of gain from manipulating Rodrigo. Iago openly admits he is using Rodrigo for his own personal benefit, for sport or for fun, all while insulting him by calling him an idiot. Iago begins to talk about how he hates them all, which is a high modal response and is very emotional. But why would Iago go to so much trouble to get his revenge on Othello if he thinks so highly of him? It's because he feels utterly betrayed by him. Iago and Othello are both in the military, and therefore would fight alongside each other, forming a strong bond. When Othello picked Cassio over Iago due to changing values, Iago feels utterly betrayed and therefore spirals into rage and revenge. He then begins to talk about a rumour that has been spread around about Othello sleeping with Emilia, and it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets he's done my office. This would be an act of adultery, as the Ten Commandments say, and in Leviticus 20:10 was punishable by death, which may be why Iago feels death is a suitable punishment, a wife for a wife. Now Iago has no idea if this is true, but suspicion seems to be enough for him. I know not if to be true, but I, for mere suspicion of that kind, will do as for surety. He's going to run with it anyway, even if it isn't true. Iago simply doesn't care at this point. He needs some sort of justifiable excuse to carry out his revenge plot. Iago then carries on with his diabolical plan, telling us about how Othello actually thinks quite highly of him and how he can use this to his advantage. He holds me well, the better shall my purpose work on him. Which is actually quite fascinating, because this also talks about how he's got that very two-faced personality. He really only thinks about himself. It shows that self-centered side of Iago in knowing that Othello thinks quite highly of him and thinks he's a good man, and therefore he can then use that against him for his own benefit. Iago then talks about how Cassio is a proper man, how he's very handsome, good with the ladies, and quite seductive, making him the perfect candidate for his plan. He talks about how he can use both in a double knavery to get revenge on not only him but also Othello. We then see the repetition of how. Iago is basically questioning himself, not really knowing how he is going to do this, and developing his plan. This repetition of how kind of shows how erratic and irrational Iago's thinking is, because he is not actually thinking accordingly. He is just playing on pure emotion and is in the moment and really wants to get his revenge and do it properly. If we jump back slightly, we actually see Iago use Othello's name for the first time in the line just underneath how, let's see. Basically, Iago only really refers to Othello as the Moor, which is quite a racial slur, and it makes sense to his character, being that racist, two-faced butthole that we know of. However, he does use Othello's name here once, and we don't really see that in any of the other soliloquies. It only really just appears here. This actually shows how resentful he actually is to Othello, despite thinking he is a good man. He really does resent Othello, pretty much based on the fact that he picked Cassio over him. Okay, let's jump back on track. Here, Iago explains, to abuse Othello's ear that he is too familiar with his wife. He hath a person and a smooth disposed to be suspected, framed to make women false. Here, Iago is talking about how he's going to frame Desdemona of committing adultery, or in other words, sleeping around with Cassio, by planting the idea into Othello's head, causing him this immense amount of jealousy, inevitably leading to Desdemona's and his death. And because Cassio, being the seductive, handsome, good with the ladies man that he is, Othello would therefore have to believe it. It just makes sense. Iago then goes on to talk about how Othello is of free and open nature, basically meaning that he does think rather highly of Othello, that he's quite open and he's very straightforward in what he wants. However, he actually thinks that when a man seems honest, he is honest, which makes Othello actually quite easy to manipulate down the track when Iago inevitably unleashes his plot. Iago then begins to talk about hell and night, meaning that with some help from the devil, his plan will succeed. This is quite ironic, because you would never, in that time, a white man would never be associated or would call upon the devil to help him with anything. That would often be associated with Othello purely based on the fact that he's a black man. Meaning that from the context of the time, Othello was often associated with the devil, voodoo or black magic, as we see in Act 1, Scene 2 from Brabantio, when he says in one of his testimonies, for an abuser of the world, a practicer of arts, inhibited out of warrant. But Iago, no. He's a white man, and he would never be associated with the devil, and therefore this is quite ironic, because he is associating himself with the devil and calling upon him for his plans to succeed. And therefore he then continues with monstrous birth as a metaphor for his plan. The full stop at the end of his entire soliloquy is quite abrupt, as we don't really see much punctuation throughout his entire soliloquy, which is a technique called enjambment, creating a bit more flow as he talks about his plan. We do see a few full stops, but there are sections where there is a bit of enjambment. However, right at the end, there is this full stop, which basically leaves it as it's relatively final. It indicates that his plan is now set in stone and nothing's going to change. He's just going to unleash this on the world, and that is how it's going to go. And it really does show where Iago's intentions lie in terms of character. He is extremely determined, and it's kind of his way or the highway. It just has to be this way.